The hearing room was still, almost too still. Reporters leaned forward, cameras pointed, staffers whispering under their breath. Everyone knew something was about to happen, but no one could have guessed how explosive it would become. At the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Texas. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't shaken. Her notes were stacked neatly in front of her, her voice steady, her eyes locked on the task at hand. Across the table sat Senator Ted Cruz. Arms crossed, smirk curling at the edge of his mouth, he watched her the way a hunter watches prey. Cruz had been here before, dozens of times. His career was built on turning moments like these into headline-making battles. He had the experience, the reputation, and the sharpness to dominate a room. And facing him was a woman he thought would be easy to crush, younger, newer, untested. At least, that's what he believed. But this wasn't just another committee meeting. The stakes were much bigger. This was about voting rights, about whether millions of Americans would have fair access to the ballot box. It was about an old guard senator who had mastered the art of interruption and intimidation, and a first-term congresswoman who had made her life's work fighting for justice. The tension was thick enough to cut. Every eye in that room was waiting to see if Crockett would fold under pressure or rise above it. Cruz was ready to strike, his interruptions loaded, his lines prepared. Crockett was ready too, but in a way he didn't expect. What happened in the next 20 minutes would not only silence the room but change the way millions saw Ted Cruz forever. Ted Cruz had done this dance more times than anyone could count. His strategy was always the same: interrupt, derail, dominate. He didn't come into hearings to listen. He came to control them. And from the moment Jasmine Crockett opened her mouth, he was already planning his first strike. It didn't take long. Barely a minute into her statement, Cruz leaned forward, his voice cutting like a knife. "Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I believe the Congresswoman is mischaracterizing the legal precedent she's citing." The words were polite on the surface, but the tone was sharp, designed to slice into her rhythm. The room shifted. Some staffers glanced up from their notes. Crockett paused, looked at him, and calmly replied, "Senator, if you allow me to finish, I'll address your concern." She didn't flinch. She didn't stumble. She just kept going. But Cruz wasn't satisfied. He never was after just one interruption. He had a playbook, and he was determined to run through it. Moments later, as Crockett began presenting statistics on polling place closures, he cut in again. "Point of order. The data the Congresswoman is presenting appears incomplete. Are we really going to base policy decisions on cherry-picked numbers?" A low murmur spread across the room. Even some of Cruz's colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One interruption could be oversight. Two, this quickly, looked like harassment. But Cruz didn't care. He thrived on these moments, the back and forth, the sound bites that would later play on cable news. Crockett held her ground. "Senator, the full methodology is available, and I'd be happy to share it with you after I finish." Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she had expected this. That only pushed Cruz to press harder. The third interruption came as she spoke about voter intimidation. "Mr. Chairman," Cruz said, his tone dripping with disdain, "I must object to the way she's characterizing legitimate election security measures as intimidation. That kind of language is reckless and has no place in serious discussion." Now the tension in the room was undeniable. Reporters leaned forward in their seats. Staffers scribbled notes faster. This wasn't just a hearing anymore, it was turning into a showdown. Still, Crockett didn't snap back. She kept her composure. "Senator, poll watching is legal. Intimidation is not. The evidence I'm presenting makes that distinction very clear." Her words were steady, but her eyes were sharp. Cruz wasn't backing down. He never did. The fourth time he jumped in, his voice rose louder. "Point of order. The Congresswoman is conflating two entirely separate issues. Poll watching protects democracy. What she's describing is something else entirely." This was Cruz in his element, louder, sharper, angrier. Theatrics over substance. He knew how to twist words, to throw opponents off balance by making them defend points they hadn't even made. Crockett's jaw tightened slightly, but her delivery stayed smooth. She answered him once more and kept going. Then came the fifth interruption. "Mr. Chairman," Cruz said with exaggerated patience, "we must remember that the Constitution sets limits on federal authority. What the Congresswoman is advocating amounts to federal overreach. This kind of proposal undermines state sovereignty." The room grew heavier. This wasn't oversight anymore, it was domination. Cruz was trying to drown her out before she could even make her case. Crockett's supporters in the audience clenched their fists. Even some Republicans looked down, uneasy with how far he was pushing. And then came the sixth interruption, the most aggressive yet. As Crockett tried to deliver her closing points, Cruz slammed his hand down on the table.
"Point of order," he barked.
His voice was louder now, dripping with condescension. This entire presentation is nothing more than partisan theater designed to justify a federal takeover of state election systems. We cannot allow this hearing to be used for radical revisionism. The sound of his palm hitting the wood echoed through the room. It wasn't just about words anymore, it was theater, intimidation, raw power. The air in the chamber turned electric. Democrats erupted in protest, calling for order. The chairman's gavel pounded, trying to calm the chaos. Reporters' pens flew across their notepads. Cameras zoomed in tighter. And in the middle of it all, Jasmine Crockett stood still. Papers in hand, face unreadable, her body calm while the storm raged around her. 6 times in 10 minutes, she had been interrupted. 6 times her voice had been cut off. Any normal witness would have cracked by now, lost their place, stumbled over words, fallen into Cruz's trap. But Crockett wasn't just any witness. She'd been here before, in different forms. Courtrooms filled with hostile judges. Opposing lawyers trying to rattle her. Rooms where she was underestimated for being young, for being a woman, for being new. What the room couldn't see yet was that Crockett wasn't rattled. She was waiting. Waiting for the right moment to turn his own tactics against him. Cruz thought he had her cornered, that his interruptions were breaking her down. But in reality, he was walking right into the trap she had been preparing for her entire career. The audience didn't know it yet. Cruz didn't know it yet. But the sixth interruption wasn't a victory, it was the turning point. The frustration that filled the room wasn't Crockett's. It belonged to Cruz. And soon, that frustration was going to explode back in his face. The room was buzzing after Cruz's sixth interruption. Democrats were shouting for order, Republicans were shifting in their seats, and the chairman's gavel pounded again and again. The air was thick with tension, but through it all, Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She stood at the podium, papers in hand, her expression calm but unshakable. She had taken everything Cruz had thrown at her, and now it was her turn. She set her notes down on the table. For the first time since the hearing began, she looked directly at Ted Cruz, not as a rookie facing a giant, but as an equal ready to strike back. Her voice was steady, but there was a sharp edge to it now. "Senator Cruz," she said, her tone cutting through the noise. "You've interrupted me 6 times in the past 10 minutes. I think it's time we talk about what the word respect really means." The room froze. Cruz's trademark smirk faded for just a second. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could get a word out, Crockett kept going. "You've made claims about election security. You've thrown around accusations about fraud. So let me ask you plainly, Senator, do you have actual evidence of widespread voter fraud in Texas that would justify closing polling locations in minority communities?" Cruz blinked. He hadn't expected that. For years, he had mastered the art of questioning, of forcing others onto defense. But now, it was Crockett asking the questions. He shifted in his chair. "Congresswoman, there are documented irregularities." Crockett cut him off. Her voice rose, sharp and commanding. "I asked for evidence, Senator. Not talking points. Do you have specific data showing voter fraud that justifies the closures I was discussing?" The silence that followed was deafening. Cruz cleared his throat. "Well, the issue is more complex than." "So that's a no," Crockett said calmly. "You don't have the evidence. Yet you've interrupted me 6 times to challenge mine." Gasps spread across the room. Staffers' pens flew across notepads. Reporters leaned in closer. For the first time, Cruz looked unsettled. But Crockett wasn't finished. She turned her body slightly, addressing the full committee now, her voice carrying like a hammer striking metal. "Mr. Chairman, for the past 10 minutes I've been interrupted again and again by someone who claims to care about evidence and accuracy. But when asked to provide his own evidence, he has nothing. Not one shred of data. What Senator Cruz has offered this committee is not oversight, it's performance." Cruz tried to speak again. "Point of." "No, Senator," Crockett cut him off, her voice sharper this time. "You've had your 6 chances. Now it's my turn." The power in the room shifted instantly. Cruz, who had dominated the first 10 minutes, now sat back in his chair, lips pressed tight, unsure what to do. Crockett had flipped his own tactic against him, and he hadn't seen it coming. She leaned down, pulled a thick folder from her stack of papers, and held it up for everyone to see. "Since Senator Cruz is so concerned about evidence, let's talk about his own record. This folder contains voting data from his 2018 re-election campaign. She opened it slowly, flipping through the pages. It shows his campaign relied heavily on early voting, on mail-in ballots, and on extended polling hours, the exact same methods he now claims are dangerous. Cruz's face turned red. He shifted again, but Crockett kept going, her voice growing louder with each word. In Harris County alone, Senator Cruz received 287,000 early votes. His campaign sent mail-in ballot applications to senior communities. His staff worked to extend polling hours in areas where his support was strongest. Those methods were good enough to help him win, but now he stands here calling them fraud. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Cruz's allies had no words. Crockett closed the folder with a snap. She stared directly at him and delivered the final blow.
So which is it, Senator?
Were those votes secure when they put you in office, or are they fraudulent now that other communities depend on them? You can't have it both ways.
The room erupted.
Democrats pounded the table in applause. Reporters shouted into phones. Even some Republicans looked away, uncomfortable with the hypocrisy laid bare in front of them. Cruz, once the predator, now looked like the prey, cornered, exposed, and silent. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out. For years, he had prided himself on being the sharpest debater in the room. But in this moment, he had no argument. His own record had been turned against him, his own tactics used to trap him.
Crockett didn't smile. She didn't gloat.
She simply stood there, calm as ever, and delivered one final line. Senator, your 7th interruption proved my point better than any speech I could have given. When politicians attack voting rights while relying on those same rights for their own elections, that isn't principle, it's hypocrisy. The words hit like a hammer. Cameras captured Cruz's face, stripped of his usual smirk. His silence said more than any defense could. Jasmine Crockett had not just survived the storm, she had turned it back on the man who created it. And in that moment, every person watching, inside the room and across the country, knew they had just witnessed a knockout. The hearing broke into chaos. Democrats clapped and cheered, Republicans sat frozen, and the chairman's gavel hammered for order. But no one was paying attention anymore. The moment had already slipped beyond the walls of that committee room. Phones were out, cameras zoomed in, and within seconds, the exchange was racing across social media. Clips of Crockett's words spread like wildfire. Senator, you've had your 6 chances, became an instant rallying cry. The image of Cruz, stunned and silent after being interrupted himself, turned into a meme within minutes. Hashtags trended before the hearing was even over. What Cruz had hoped would be another show of dominance became a public unraveling in real time. News networks rushed to cut segments. Evening shows opened with the clip. Political reporters filled their columns with sharp headlines. Freshman rep turns tables on Cruz, and 6 interruptions, one devastating response. Analysts who had once praised Cruz's debate skills now called his worst defeat on camera. For Jasmine Crockett, the effect was immediate. Overnight, she went from a little-known first-term Congresswoman to a national name. Invitations poured in, interviews, speeches, panel discussions. Advocacy groups used her performance in fundraising campaigns. Voting rights organizations clipped her takedown into ads that spread far beyond Washington. But the impact wasn't just about her. The voting rights bill that had seemed stuck only days earlier suddenly gained momentum. Members who had been on the fence now pointed to Crockett's evidence and clarity as reason to support it. For once, the noise of political theater had been cut through by facts, and it mattered. Cruz, meanwhile, struggled to recover. His team pushed out statements insisting he had raised important constitutional questions, but the video told a different story. 6 interruptions, no evidence, and a silence that spoke louder than words. Even some of his usual allies admitted privately he had walked into a trap. The ripple effects reached far beyond one man's bad day. Law schools began using the clip in advocacy classes, showing how composure and preparation can dismantle aggression. Debate teams studied it as an example of flipping power dynamics. Women in politics shared it as proof that calm persistence could break through even the loudest attempts to silence them. Crockett had turned a hearing into a lesson, and the lesson spread everywhere. The cultural shift was just as powerful. For years, committee hearings had been treated like theater, with interruptions and grandstanding more common than real discussion. But after Crockett's performance, things felt different. Senators and representatives thought twice before trying the same bullying tactics, knowing that now there was a blueprint for turning them upside down.